Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. Thank you so much for having us on today, Esoteric, to discuss this very important topic of religious indoctrination of children. As I look at this very, I'd say, esteemed panel, I've seen Deborah Grace, Stevie Noah, and I got to sit with Dr. Alisha Powell. I've seen all of these ladies touch on the subject. And so I'm very honored to be a part of this, excited to be a part of this. And so without further ado, I'd like to just get started having the panelists introduce themselves. Let's start with Dr. Powell, and then we'll go to Stevie Noah, and last but not least, Deborah Grace.
Sure. Thank you. First and foremost, thank you so much for having me. My name is Dr. Alisha Powell. I am a social worker, a therapist, and a professor. I have a background in social psychology, and I primarily work with individuals who have experienced coming out of religiously abusive organizations. I've been working as a therapist for a little bit over 10 years now, and I also have had the personal experience of being in a religiously abusive organization. So that's something that I kind of marry with some of my clinical experience in the work that I do with families and couples. So thank you so much for having me.
And
I'm Stevie Noah.
Yes.
I'm Stevie Noah. So I have been a coach and a hypnotherapist and an NLP practitioner for 15 years. And now I specialize in religious trauma and have for quite a few years now. So at this point, what I do is I work with people to really help them establish a life after religion, understanding what they went through, helping them to process that. And I have kind of my own system for helping them to release the trauma that's stored in their body and help them to sort of really create goals and go after their dreams like they've never done before. So that's what I do.
And I am Deborah Grace, and I'm an author of Crucifying the Bible, where I did touch a little bit on the religious indoctrination. I'm writing my second book, which goes much heavier into the religious indoctrination of children and the oppressive nature of religious texts. I'm a wife and a mom, and previously 40 plus years in religious cults and indoctrinated from youth.
Thank you so much, ladies. So where would you like to begin? Do we want to start with the mind of the child before we even talk about the indoctrination? Can we do that? Just talking about the mind before age 5. Any one of you can jump in. Dr. Powell, Deborah Grace, Noah, Stevie Noah. Mm-hmm. What's going on with that impressionable mind and the building of the psyche?
A lot. You want to jump in? I always start out teaching my clients about the brain at that age, of course, it's in that alpha theta state. So it's in that sponge state, right? And there's no critical faculty. There's no way for them to actually be able to decipher right from wrong, up from down, basically. If the parent says, don't put your hand on a hot stove because you'll get burnt, and then they also tell them in another breath that they're going to go to hell for spilling the milk, right. There's no way for them to decipher the difference between what's really true. So, and then you've got your Hebrean learning, right? You've got that patterning, the consistent, repetitive patterning over and over and over again of this is the way it is, this is how it works. And this sponge, this child's brain, and we all have been there, right? Because we all grew up in this, we're just soaking this in and believing that this is how the world is. So there's a lot more, of course, I could say on that, but I'd love to hear what the other ladies have to say too.
Before that, I want to throw this quote from Aristotle out to everybody. You're probably familiar with it. Give me a child until he is 7 and I will show you the man. So I will specifically go to Dr. Powell, who is a psychologist. Can you talk to us a little bit, man? Thank you. That was very wonderful information that you gave us, Stevie. Thank you for that. Dr. Powell, why before age 5 is like what Stevie said, why is there no, it's like a sponge. Why is the critical thinking not even developed really before that age?
Well, I mean, our brain is ever evolving and ever growing, and those are some of the most crucial and formative years for children. We think of all the ways that language is even formed at that young age, and when it comes to religious terminology and religious languages, those are usually the ages where it means so much. Where children think about, Santa Claus, they think about fairy tales, and using religious terminology in these very formative ages and at this critical time in development also means that children see the world through that lens growing up. They see their parents as authority figures, and in some ways kind of a representation of God to them, because their parents are the authority. They're who they see on a daily basis. They're the ones providing care, providing attention, providing resources. So whatever the parents say, children are, innately designed to accept what parents say is truth, because that's the only source of truth that they have at that young age. So they have no other way to decipher what is truth and what is not, because their parents are the only representation for them at that time. And usually children aren't going to school around those ages, especially when we're talking about ages 0 through 5. They may be in daycare, they may have other interactions with children, but first and foremost, parents and other adults in their life are the primary caregivers and the primary source of information about their world.
Wow, great segue into what I was going to ask. I'd like to ask Deborah Grace. Now, before we went live, I heard you talking, Deborah, with Esoteric about just the prayers that are taught, the fear that's instilled. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the fear that the parents have, they transfer onto the children? Because isn't it true that they actually are indoctrinated and they believe God's going to kill me? Talk to us a little bit about that fear that's transferred. And anybody else can jump in. I'm just, in the beginning, just asking specific questions to specific people. But anyway, Deborah, please talk to us about the fear.
Well, fear will cause trauma in little kids. And Dr. Bruce Perry spoke quite a bit about that. When children are exposed to fear and it causes trauma, it creates an inability to learn properly growing up later on in life. These children do not have the ability to say no to their parents. So when their parents are teaching them specific prayers, like now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. That is, while they don't have a filter. So there's no filter on children. So when they're receiving this information, it's being logged somewhere. And as they associate that fear later on in life to their religion, and they're receiving this information from people they trust, it's creating a critical thinking barrier. And I think that's extremely detrimental to kids. I don't think it's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. To put it lightly, it's basically the trauma is what holds or solidifies, right? I mean, it's like the glue that keeps them locked into the religion. I had spoken before with Esoteric and other people about it's the same as the MK Ultra trauma that I've heard about. Talking about a little bit more about the trauma and the programming. If you don't mind, anybody can jump in. Can we talk about some personal experiences, or is that okay with anyone? I mean, I didn't even mention about myself. I was a Hebrew Israelite. I'm just almost embarrassed to say I've claimed to be a Hebrew Israelite because, to be honest, I notice even now I'm breaking the traumas of it. So even right now, even though it's from 2011, right about 2015, I stopped breaking the trauma, when I say trauma, the programming. But I'm still working through it. But what I was going to say is that's my personal experience with religion, and it helped me in a way where I didn't realize that it's not just that cult that was the problem. It wasn't like how, oh, it's just the Hebrew Israelites, but I can go and now I can be, a Christian, or I can go and I'll be Muslim. I said, oh, it's blanket across the board. This is what religion is. Can anyone else will please elaborate on that if you see where I'm coming from? It's all religion, right?
Yeah, it's all, a lot of them cult hop, if you don't mind me jumping in, but a lot of them do a cult hopping situation where, and I did it too. It's like, okay, well, if I leave this one, maybe I'll find a new home in this one, and it'll be a little bit, nicer and kinder and that sort of thing. And so then you end up going and doing that and trying to find these new groups of people that sort of think the same, so that you're not quite stepping out of the box. You're not going to go to hell, because the fear's still there. It's still really real. I had 15 personally in my trauma life. I had 15 years of very traumatic, very visceral nightmares that happened every single night. So I would go into sleep paralysis, and then I would have these, what I felt was demons and all kinds of awful things come in my room, choking me, holding me down. It was, like I said, 15 years is a long time. And even, so it happened into my 20s. It happened when I do want to say this, which was really interesting and sort of started breaking it up for me, is when I got into partying. And I just want to put this out there, because I know people are going to hear it and they're going to probably have experience like this. But when I got into partying in college, and I started drinking and then passing out or whatever, the dreams stopped, which that's what started breaking the cycle. It's not the best way to do it, right? But it started making me realize that if I would party and go to sleep that way, and I didn't have these dreams, but the nights that I would pray before bed, I would have these dreams. That really started shaking me up and going, wait a second, there's something really wrong here. There's something really, I always felt that, but there was something really wrong about that. But I've had clients who, they've had at 4, 5, 6 years old, were forced to vomit in the toilet, stick their fingers down their throat, because they were talking back to their parents, and their parents accused them of being full of demons. And so that was what their church did. They required the kids to go do that, and all kinds of other horrific things. But that's just some of the stories that I have. There's quite a few. I'm sure you all have stories too. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Really.
Sure.
For me, it's still a little difficult, but I think I'm asking all of you, especially Dr. Powell, is it always going to be like that, or do you start to manage it? Is it just going to be in you? Because for hearing Stevie's story and then knowing what I deal with, I had a panic attack when I was doing research to actually do a debate about cult and women being targeted. I was reading it and I actually physically got unsettled, and because I said, oh my God, this me, and I had already left so is it always going to be this way, or are we just managing this trauma now?
Yeah. Well, I think it's first and foremost kind of important to realize that people can experience trauma differently, and individuals coming out of the same organization can have a totally different experience, and the life that they live after leaving that organization can be totally different from someone else who was in the similar organization. And so when I reflect back on my own experience and what it was like growing up, there was oftentimes kind of around the physical discipline that accompanied some of the words and sayings and what to do and what not to do. For instance, In my family, you know, it was considered a sin to eat meat or any type of animal-based products. It was also considered a sin to drink caffeine. So I remember getting a spanking, you know, when I accidentally sipped some Coke, and I had no idea what it was, or, you know, somebody just handed it to me because I said I was thirsty. And I remember that there was a very strong physical discipline component of that because I had drank the Coke and I had no idea. I was probably about 4 or 5, but having that memory also means that even today, even though I'm out of it, it's been years since then, that's not something I voluntarily drink, just because I know that the memory is there. I know there's nothing wrong with it cognitively, but emotionally, there's still that strong physical discipline component of this is bad, this is wrong, and I was punished for it.
Wow. Anybody want to just jump in, ladies?
I want to go back to the you were asking about instances that caused the trauma and the fear. And I remember specifically being called downstairs to watch a TBN broadcast that was talking about the well to hell. And that's been since debunked. But this is a you know, reputable company that was saying that this was true, that somebody had dug deep enough to where they could actually measure the temperature that had been greatly elevated and then hear all these screams. And I had nightmares for weeks, and I was just really glad that my bed was on the second floor, and you know, I'm sitting there watching this crying, and you know, sitting on the couch putting my feet off of the floor because I was scared. You know, the further away from it I am, the better. But I was 7 years old at the time. And this is the type of fear and indoctrination that's given to kids. I can't imagine how, you know, I feel like I've been a pretty strong person. I can't imagine somebody who was more empathetic and more sensitive to that type of information, how they handled that throughout their years, remembering that. And then the 2 movies about the rapture that kids are exposed to, and they even have a children's series about that rapture. This is anyway, I'll let somebody else jump in now.
Thank you
No, I'm
for
with
sharing.
you. Yeah.
I mean, it's clearly difficult even hearing. Thank you so much to for all of you sharing. You know, this is what religion is. It's not like these are anomalies, like we're just on the fringe. This is the basis, and I don't want this to come off as religious belief or faith bashing. So you know, I did want to say, I'm trying to be very careful because I know there are people of the Abrahamic faith who are there. Most people, if not all people, are wonderful people who want to, you know, follow God and do what's right. However, those are the faiths. That's the issue that I have. I guess I'm saying this is something personal. The Abrahamic religions they seem to be the ones where we're told, well, we're doing this because we love you. You know, you know, vomiting or spanking, scaring your child to death about some hell in the ground. We're doing this because we love you. But really, when you look at it, if it was not religion and it was something else, you know, let's say, you know, Michael Jackson said we should do this, or just whatever, or this is a political party, it would be clearly child abuse. So, I mean, I don't want to, we can do, this is our whole for everybody. I don't want to just try to, you know, take over, lead. But for me, can we talk, I want to say, do you want to talk about society and how we turn a blind eye to things like that? Like if someone said, oh, well, you know, little Alisha, she got spanked, you know, people would be like, oh my gosh, what should we do? Oh, but it was because her parents believe this and we have to, oh, I understand. Why is society like this?
Well, they've been getting away with it for I mean, what, thousands and thousands of years. This particular industry, I'm going to call it an industry because that's really what it is. I mean, it's a money-making thought control industry. And they've gotten away with it for so long. And sure, I understand that they needed to feel that they separated, you know, the religion separated from state many, many years ago because of this whole control, but it's never been actually separated.
Right.
And yeah, and so they got away with it for a long time because there was, you know, it's almost like the don't ask, don't tell situation consistently for all these years. And now there's just people like they can't get away with it anymore because people are speaking up and they're coming out. The toxic doctrines, you know, the fear, the shame, the guilt, the fantasy thinking, like all of this stuff is that they can create any punishment behind it that they want to and have for a really long time, you know, and all of this stuff, the repressed critical thinking, because you can't think, you can't ask questions, you can't do any, you know, all this stuff affects the social ability of the child. It affects the intellectual ability, the emotional, even the sexual. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of people I've worked with that have like the sexual aspect of their mind, of their body, of what they've been through is just so twisted. And all they want to do is they just want to be themselves again. They don't even know what that is, because usually if they've been indoctrinated as a child, they never had a chance to even know who they are, you know? So,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I know that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go on, Deborah Grace. I have a thought after you. That's totally fine.
Okay. Well, I was looking through the DSM for research for my next book, and I came across a couple of caveats that are listed in some of the diagnoses. And those caveats alluded to, if it's in religion, we can't categorize that because this much of society actually believes it. So it's not that because of an appeal to populace. You guys want to speak to that?
That's crazy. Well, I shouldn't say crazy, but that's wild to me. But we see it anyway. Dr. Powell, please go ahead.
Well, I think that Deborah Grace makes a great point. And even as, you know, a therapist myself, like there's so many times when I want to say, you know, this is a religious disorder, you know, this is a cognitive distortion that really should be diagnosed. But there's also the aspect of, you know, people come from different cultures, they have different religions. And I think the DSM, or people that create the DSM, are really trying to kind of walk a fine line between cultural and religious norms and, you know, what could be applicable across, you know, global and other civilizations. So I think it's a fine line, although I don't think that it means that it doesn't exist. I think that it means that there's some holes that we as clinicians kind of need to fill when it comes to intervening and doing clinical work with these populations. But also, you know, when we think about children and their upbringing, growing up with like this impending sense of doom, you know, impacts every aspect of your life. If you're growing up believing I may not make it to adulthood because, you know, Jesus is coming back, or I may have to run to the hills, or my life will be changed in some big fashion before I even grow up, that impacts the planning that you have for the future. It impacts the way that you see the world. And it also impacts the relationships that you have with other people or people outside of your organization, because you're also secretly believing that you're going to be, you know, in heaven or they'll be in hell, and it's your job to try to bring them into the fold so that you can be saved together. And this whole, you know, proselytizing approach and growing up with this fear-based, you know, approach can also mean that children never get a chance to fully explore in their own personalities and what they truly enjoy doing, because they're told what to enjoy. They're told what to say. They're told what to do. And we really
not enjoy
children. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We stifle children so much doing that to them.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, I'm sitting here listening and I'm thinking about those who are, you know, of a religion who will be watching this. And for diplomacy, I'm wondering, what if they allowed their children what if they didn't indoctrinate their children? What if they actually exposed their children to these other religions? I mean, I'm sure there are some people out there who are doing things like this, and bless them. But so, because I don't want to come off, for some people, you know, in their cognitive dissonance and in their program, they instantly hear, oh, they don't love our God, they're against us. So I mean, I'm speaking to the people who do follow a religion. I mean, wouldn't it be better if you believe that your faith is so strong and it's so right? Why wouldn't you expose your children to all the different religions or all the different beliefs? Talk to me about that. Anybody?
Well,
Wouldn't
they're
that be
still,
better?
they're in fear as well. They can't do that. They have been taught that that's not, you know, that this is I think anyways, this is my opinion, but I believe there's a sense of entitlement that goes along with this whole thing too, because it's like, well, we're the chosen ones. We've got the right God. We've got the right system. We've got all of, this is perfect, and we're the right ones. And it just kind of, it's a theme that goes through each and every one of them. And I think that obviously that those lines are getting a little bit blurred now because there are so many religions and there are so many people open to learning new things now. But for many generations, and we have to remember that trauma is passed down, cellularly as well, and in our DNA, right? So we've got these beliefs and these patterns and all these things going into each and every person that's born. And so there's that whole entitlement, there's that whole fear. You can't leave this one because we're the only ones that's right. And if you teach your child that, coming back to what you said before, if you give me the child, I'll give you the man. Mm-hmm. They don't want them to learn anything else because that's going to create questions. Mm-hmm. And then that's going to create a situation where they have to explain the difference and what's going on. And they don't know the difference because they haven't done it themselves. They haven't studied other religions. They haven't studied or figured out the answers to all these questions either.
Oftentimes you have parents who are indoctrinated themselves who were taught not to look over here, don't look over there, don't associate with those who have fallen away, lean not on your own understanding, and this is it. This is the only thing that there is out there, and so they incredibly shield and protect their children from receiving alternate information. It's quite a shame, but I remember not being able to watch certain shows as a child and not being able to go to people's houses because they didn't believe. I wasn't able to go. I was homeschooled for 4 years as a child. There's a lot that goes into that type of indoctrination that is carried down from parents who were also indoctrinated. There's a lot.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to keep in mind there's the community component of that, because it's not only families believing this way, it's communities. So your church community, a lot of times your school community, if you go to a church school or a private school or your homeschool, this is your entire world. And so even parents who are making these decisions for their children, many times they're surrounded by other adults and other families that are encouraging this and supporting this as well. There's other faith leaders involved that are continuing to push this doctrine, to push these beliefs. So it's a very hard system to leave from, especially if there's that family component, if their friends are there, if their parents are there, if their siblings are there in it as well. There's a draw to it that's very hard to break.
Absolutely. Well, I was homeschooled as well. Yeah. And because of that, I had even my schooling controlled, right? So I wasn't allowed to learn normal science, for instance. I wasn't allowed to learn normal history. I wasn't allowed to learn normal sexuality. I mean, all of that stuff was taken off the table because they had full control and they wanted it that way so that I believed exactly the way the community and my family believed. So, yeah.
I want to share some more personal information as I listen. I feel compelled to talk about this with my children. As far as my children, I have 2 children. They both were school age, or one is still school age, one is now, he's out of high school. But they were school age in 2011 when I entered into the Hebrew Israelites. And ironically, I was raised by a mother who, we would read the Bible and study it, but she'd be like, this isn't true, or you got to find this out for yourself. She always was like that. And my dad, though, he was very strict Catholic. So imagine the home. So anyway, that's why I always was seeking, truth, looking into Buddhism and Islam and then, you know, doing all the whole, my sister and I, we were doing this conspiracy theory thing. And that's how I found the Hebrew Israelites. So my children, up until then, I didn't indoctrinate them. Like I had stopped going to Catholic church, and I just told them, but I did tell them about God and, you know, loving people. But once 2011 hit, it was like culture shock for them. So they weren't raised in it. They were like, but they still, because they were very young, school age, they went with it, like with the flow. However, everything you said, like the homeschooling, oh gosh, I'm getting a little emotional. See, I'm still, just the food. My daughter loved marshmallows. We couldn't eat marshmallows anymore. Oh, wait, I spent 3 hours in the store reading, oh, there's gelatin. You know, it's like, and I just am so hurt on one side because I'm out of it. I tell my children, you know, I'm sorry, we've moved on from that. They're great children. They're like, finally, my son at least. I'm hurt that I did that to them, but I feel good that I showed them this is what you don't ever do in your life. I'm getting emotional. Like, you never look at the damage, look at the birthdays we missed, look at the Christmases we didn't do because we thought God's going to kill us. We're going to get killed with nuclear missiles. That was the doctrine. We're not going to get beamed up into spaceships. That was the doctrine. And so as I listen, I had to share that because, I mean, there are a lot of parents out there who are in cults and in religions. It hurts. There's pain, there's trauma. But when you get out, the good thing is you can say, don't ever do this to your life. And my children are 100%. It's such a beautiful thing when they hear ridiculous, anything religion, I don't care what it is. Hey, do you want to come see Jesus? They run. Like, so I wanted to share that because there's a lot of pain caused, but, it hurts me to think I was like that for a while, but, I think I did them a great service. They'll never, ever be in a cult. I mean, what do you can comment on that if you want. I said a lot.
Yeah, I would like to add a little bit to that. I actually told my son the last few years that I was in a Bible believer. I was considered I was in the Hebrew roots Messianic faith. Wow. And those last few years that I told my son that, you know, I would love him no matter what, except if he were a homosexual. And I told him at that point, if you do that, if you go down that road, I will disown you. And wow. I have since apologized to him for that profusely, because it's wrong. And I still to this day get emotional because I know that had to have been so hurtful to him.
Right.
Regardless of what life he's chosen now, and as far as I know, he's not. But if he were, I would love him anyway.
That's their son. Exactly.
It's my son.
Yeah, and the way they tell you to hate people. That's one thing I didn't do. But it was crazy how I did it. And I have to say crazy because I know it was crazy. I would tell them things. They told us all white people are the devil. So we have white people in our family who, I mean, they're family, blood relatives. And I'd say, oh, but Aunt so-and-so, she's not all white people. It was my little secret thing to keep the madness. I'd be like, they're Israelites like us. It's just that God made them light skinned. I was saying madness. But my children, you know, the gay thing, they're gonna die. Oh, I wish they weren't gay. We love them so much. I'm ashamed, but I'm sharing it. It's sick and it damages. So anyway, I feel
I love that you said that, and I'd like to add to that too, because so this whole aspect of unconditional love, right? We're taught that God, whatever God you're following, has this insane love for you. It is unconditional, never ending, all prevailing, it is just the best you can get. And yet, right, the confusion, you're teaching kids to love you unconditionally, all this stuff. And then that you've got all of the fear behind it. So now you're trying to teach a child, because in a Christian religion, typically it's, if you love God enough, you fear him. Okay, so
Yeah.
These wires are getting this whole love and fear, and then hell, and then the guilt and the shame, everything's getting crossed. And if you look at the vibration of love that they can measure now, it's awesome, and it's this high vibration. It is a very quick wavelength. And the vibration of fear, which is a very low level wavelength and very slow, they don't even come close to matching. So to teach a child, now you're trying to teach them in their brain and in their body, where they store the trauma and these beliefs, that you're crossing all their wires, is what I'm trying to say. That those two aspects do not go together. And yet the whole thing that you're supposed to believe is that if you fear God, that you love him unconditionally. And that if it makes absolute no sense, right?
Right.
So yeah, and so that just, it goes from there. I'll let someone else.
Yeah, growing up, I was taught that, love meant obedience. So if you love God, you'll obey him. If you love your parents, you'll obey them. And so many of the little songs we sang as kids were centered around obedience and being good and making the right choices and, going to heaven one day. These are all part of the indoctrination that really creates an us versus them mentality that's so hard, to get out of, even in adulthood, as far as the us versus them, we're good, they're bad. And it really doesn't take into account so many of the nuances that come along with just living in society and interacting with people on a daily basis.
You also have the problem of the command to love.
Yeah.
I don't command my children to love me. I don't command my husband to love me. My parents didn't command me to love them. But this biblical command to love God isn't, to me, it just shows that the authors of the Bible didn't understand what love was. Or like I've said before, I think that man has corrupted a great deal of religious texts. And so you can't pick and choose what was corrupted and what wasn't, if you also have it being said that it's inspired by the Holy Spirit. So you have quite a conundrum of trying to untangle all that, as Stevie eloquently said.
Wow. And is it possible to even untangle it? I mean, with all that I said, I'm glad that I had my family who wasn't, they didn't know who I was. They gave me a great foundation. So you're lost in that madness. And that's what we need, right? There has to be someone on the outside who we know, who we can trust. But a lot of times the cult or some people might be listening saying, well, that was just that radical psycho Hebrew. No, that's religion. So what about that when there's someone outside who you're tethered to? Can we speak about those who can give you that, okay, come back, don't go all the way in there, pull you out? Because I wouldn't have been able to untangle that on my own, not in time. Maybe once everything had burned down in my life and I'm sitting there in the ashes, I would realize. But talk to us about the importance, especially with children, because children are always, who can a child turn to, right? They're in the family, no one. So, I mean, I'm going to put that out there. Like, what about those who are on the outside? How important it is to have someone who's not in it to tether you and pull you out?
I think it's hugely important. Like just going to other people's homes and seeing how their family interacted you know, even if it wasn't like, sure, they called themselves Christian, but maybe they didn't go to church very often or whatever. But being able to see what they watched on TV, being able to see, yeah, like how they interact with their own kids, how they interact with each other, the jokes they tell, just the whole being able to have, you know, spend the night at a friend's house and have a new experience in a new family was mind-blowing for me as a child. Absolutely mind-blowing. Yeah.
And did you
Well,
ask
look at all.
questions? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, look at all of the other religions, the Amish, for example. Their entire community is cut off from the outside world. This isn't just nuanced, or it's not just pointing out the Christians and the Islams and some of the Orthodox Jewish sects, but you have other, the Mormons incredibly isolate their members. The Jehovah's Witness isolate their members. And then for me, I was very isolated. My high school graduating class was 34 people once I went back to public school. But you know, we were in the middle of nowhere with just a handful of other families who were like-minded, who we were allowed to spend time with. So I didn't see that outside experience until I was in 8th grade.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's something to be said about, you know, just having somebody on the outside that you can reach out to. Growing up, that wasn't my experience. We also lived kind of in the middle of nowhere. I was homeschooled until college. And then even then I went to a very small Christian school. So I really didn't get any of that until graduate school personally. So just the isolation, I think that's also part of the abusive nature of religion, is that there's so much isolation. There's an us versus them, and they are kind of really dead set on separating their children from other children. And that is intentional.
Yeah.
It's built into the texts. It's, you know, train a child in the way they will go, and as an adult, that won't stray from it. That's scripture. So it's commanded really to teach your children to promulgate and to propagate this ideology and the dogma that is so parallel to different types of abuse. Isolation is economic abuse is built into the scriptures. There's so many different types that are built in and backstopped in, and the firewalls that are in scripture too, that keep that in place and keep the fear. If you're a parent and you believe that, you know, you're doing what God wants you to do, then you'll stop at nothing to keep that firewall in place. But if you really take a look at it, if this is truth, then nothing should threaten it. No outside forces, no outside discussions, no scrutinization, no criticizing of these texts would threaten it if it were true.
Mm-hmm.
Very true. Amazing.
I don't want to talk over anyone, but yes, exactly. If it's true, that's what I was saying about the let them study other religions. That's something my mom actually did do. My dad, even though he was super Catholic, he wasn't. It was just going with the motions. You know, we are Catholic. This is how it is. It wasn't like, you know, if you go read this book, the Bhagavad Gita, God's not going to love you. So growing up, I had that. It's just, we're talking about childhood indoctrination. However, my mom letting me and my parents being kind of, you know, nonchalant about me looking into other stuff, I'm not blaming that, but I stumbled upon the worst. For me, I'm laughing, but it was just one of the worst. I'd say that was the worst time of my life when I was when I got into that, because now I can see clearer. I see it's all man-made. It's about controlling your life. They wanted us to sign power of attorney, give them all of So it's a typical cult and religion, but you know, getting away from that radical religion and going to mainstream Christianity, I want to bring it back. you know, how do we say, it's homogenized. You know, we don't have any more crusades. We don't have any more, you know, inquisitions. Nobody's getting, you know, killed, but they were killed over religion. So Christianity is so, well, you know, Jesus is shining and he loves you all. But we know that that wouldn't stick with Christians if they didn't hear, if you go against Jesus, you're going to be on the outside. It's in the scriptures, you know, gnashing teeth in the darkness. So what I'm getting at is, what about those who are in the good graces of Jesus, but we know it's the church? What about those who, I don't have any problem, I've never had any punishments, Jesus loves us? Well, how do we talk to those people who are sitting listening saying, indoctrination is the best thing it could have done for my children? How do we speak to them?
I've got something for that, if that's okay. I think with that, we need to pull in this whole trance. They're putting people in trance every Sunday, right? There's a repetition, pattern matching, you know, metaphorical. This is the way that we work as humans. And then every single Sunday and Wednesday or whatever your, you know, system requires, you're walking into a room full of people who resonate at the same level as you, right? They're all there to believe the same thing, to get into the same thing, to fall into trance together. They start usually these, you know, these whole days or the Sundays with music and everyone's moving. And it's, you know, it's like the grandfather clock situation where you stick all the grandfather clocks in one room, shut the door, they all start swinging together. Now, when you're doing that with adults, they're going to continue to perpetuate this whole thing because they love you. It releases your dopamine, right? Your oxytocin, your serotonin, your dopamine. All of this stuff it becomes addictive for adults, and of course they think it's right. They all get their kids involved with this, so every single week they're going into trance together, and they're just believing and repeating that whole thing. So I think it's difficult to pull adults out of that. I'm speaking for my own parents as well. They get a hit from it. They get high and they have friends and they have community. And so they think that high is God coming through them. You know, they don't realize that anyone from any tribe that gets into the drums and dances around a fire can get that same high. They think it's their God, their Jesus, their practice, their whatever. So it is difficult, I think, to pull adults out of that when they're getting a lot from it emotionally and they're addicted to it. And then, of course, when you've got kids that you're pulling into that and they're sponges and they're growing up in this whole, they start to believe that this is where they get their hit as well. I remember when I left, that I just had to leave the religion. I missed that hit. Like I craved it. And that's where the cult hopping comes in. It's like, okay, well, let me try this, let me try that. And it took practice, awareness, I guess you could say, to pull myself away from that. And what I did to get out of it personally was I just started hiking in the hills. So I was like, I need to get into awe and reverence, and I need to get this hit, and I need to pray I would still pray. I'd still talk to God, you know, the one but I needed a hit. And so anyways, that's what I'm saying. It's addictive, and we've got adults that are addicted to this. And so they're bringing their kids into it, and they're doing the same thing to the kids. And that's why it becomes this, like, how do you get them out of that? How do you retrain the adult?
And when they don't experience adversity, when they're just, everything's that high and they're the good ones, God, oh, look at Pastor so-and-so. And when are they going to have that break where we're like, oh, so it jars them, right? So I'm going to ask Dr. Powell, once they have that moment of adversity, when they ask a question they shouldn't have asked. Someone told me that I asked a question to the pastor and then I was told, you're going to get excommunicated. If they never talk about that, like if they never get that adversity, do they just keep going? What's going to wake them up, Dr. Powell?
Well, I think it really depends on a lot of different factors. Stevie just talked about the hit, and I think that's so true. I can't think of it of any other way as far as like the addiction. It's like addictive. You keep on going back, you get into a routine, you have a schedule, your life feels like it has meaning. And it also speaks to people's need to belong to a community, to a group. So you have a group of people, you feel like you belong there, you feel like this is where you need to be. Even if you do have questions, your need to belong a lot of times sometimes supersedes your need to critically think, your need to think differently, your need to like express yourself, because you have this need to belong. And knowing that leaving this organization, this community, or this church also means that you lose that sense of belonging. You lose, for a lot of people, they feel like they lose themselves, because they feel like they know who they are within that group. They have so many like structures. There's a person that's a leader. They have that safety of security that comes along with that. And so even when they do have questions, it's always, weighed against their need to belong and their sense of safety within that community.
Wow, yes.
I think a lot of it has to do with, you talked about the shiny Jesus, right? I think a lot of it, you have all these pastors who are not talking about the dark side of the New Testament Jesus, wherein, he comes back drenched in blood with a sword, and he's calling other nations dogs. And he's, at the end of a parable in Luke 19:27, he says, those who don't submit to me, bring them before me and slay them. There's a not so shiny part of Jesus wherein I came not for peace, I came to divide. If you don't hate your father and your mother and your brother and your sister more than you love me, there's a problem. And so reminding these people that there's a dark side to the New Testament Jesus, but they're not going to find that in church. They're not going to find those answers in church. That breaks the spell. Comedy also breaks the spell. But there's a lot of comedians who won't touch religion because it's taboo.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I want to talk to you about wow, this is great. Just this is therapy for me a little bit. I'm not gonna say it's not. This is cathartic, and it's beautiful to see and hear other people confirming, situations. You're bringing up thoughts. I was in the Hebrew Israelites for, it would be 2 years in 2013, and my brother had a horrible highway accident, 4-car pileup. We were sure he was dead because it was just so dramatic. They called us, from some people who were helping him, and it was bad. I was like, oh, he's dead, So I call the leaders, one of the guys, and I'm like, my brother, he's dead, I think. And this speaks to what you said, Deborah, about those who won't follow, who are on the outside. They said to me, and I will never forget, he said, praise God. It's one of the 2/3 anyway in the Bible. There's 1/3 that gets you. That's when it started to crumble a little, but then I just stayed in longer. When he said praise God, because I was so believing everything, it couldn't even, my brain, that was like a trauma, like an out of body experience almost. But it was like, I couldn't put it together. So I just got off the phone with him, and I did go and do back to my own self with my children. And that was a moment when I broke away from all they believe. And I said, oh, I'm getting emotional. I was like, no, we're not going to praise God over this.
Yeah.
And my children remember that. And I said, we're going to pray that whatever happens, if he's died, if he can be saved, we're going to be here. And that's when, when I heard you say that, I remember when they said, praise God. And think about it now, let's take it back to the children. Mm-hmm. I could break out of it. A child, that's all the child's known.
Right.
Okay, praise God. The people are dying. So.
Well, I was taught that, suicide is, you're going to go straight to hell if you commit suicide. Yeah. My most devout grandmother, most devout. I had obviously one on each side, and one on my father's side committed suicide.
Wow.
And at that time, I was a teenager, so I was a bit older, but I watched right in front of my eyes my entire family's story about suicide and what I've been taught my whole life completely change. All of a sudden, the rules changed. All of a sudden, she got to go to heaven because she was just, you know, a little bit messed up, like she was sick, or there was something else.
Right.
And that flip, I just couldn't believe it. I remember actually at that time not even having a reaction to her suicide because I was so numb from not only what she did and how she could do it, but also the fact that everyone, including the church where she had her funeral, changed their story.
Wow.
And I was
that's like what I told you about the whole with me. I was trying to fit in. How is my grandparent the devil? You know, so yeah,
Right.
that it conveniently can be tweaked, and that's when you know this isn't about God.
No.
So yeah, wow. Thank you for
But
sharing
very
that.
confusing for children. You know, you change those
Yeah.
rules whenever it suits you best.
Right.
And let's say I wasn't a teenager. Let's say I was a 4 or 5, 6, 7-year-old, right?
Yeah.
How confusing. How unbelievably confusing. So.
Yeah, the first funeral I went to, I was 7 years old, and we were told, well, that family didn't believe in Jesus, so he's going to hell.
Wow. Oh,
Okay.
getting back to mainstream Christianity. Did I cut you off? Because I mean, I'm talking about this radical cult, but mainstream, my family member, I'm not going to say her name because, you know, just out of respect. My cousin died of HIV, AIDS complicated, AIDS related issues. Even to this day, this was 20 years ago. I hear, do you think he's in hell? He might be in hell. It's like, so this is from childhood. We're taught these things.
Right.
So
Yeah. And I think there could be so many conflicting ideas about death. You know, I remember growing up, there was like a little child that died and they saw the death as a blessing because they didn't have to grow up in a sinful world and have to deal with the hurt and pain. And so when you're raised in the atmosphere where certain types of death are good, but if you die young, you know, that's a blessing because you don't have to grow up in the sinful world. Or if there's an unfortunate stillbirth or miscarriage, well, that's a blessing because, you know, your child never gets to know sin and, you know, they're perfect and they'll be, you know, you'll meet them in heaven. That really creates just this warped sense of understanding, but also warped relationships because we can't really access those, you know, that empathy that comes along with like part of that grieving process when you're grieving a loss.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
good point.
And that
You know,
conflict. Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry.
Please.
I was just going to say, and sorry, let me talk normal. I guess I've had too much coffee already this morning. No, but the conflicting views and the ideas also come in different forms. So not just death. So I just wanted on that to bring in the whole aspect of, I remember sitting in church listening to, I think it was Sodom and Gomorrah story. It's where, Debbie, you would know this best. But it's where the father basically is going to give his virgin daughters to the crowd. Is that the story? I've left that. Okay.
Yeah.
So I remember sitting there thinking about my dad, who I thought at that time was my hero. And I loved him unconditionally and obeyed. Anyways, I also know I knew that he was a devout lover of God. And I thought, if God required my father to throw me out to a crowd of men to abuse me in any way, I remember having this feeling of trust and dread, like the trust dripping out of my body and the dread just coming over me, and thinking, oh my God, would my father do this to me? He would do this to me. He would do this to me because he loves God that much. And it just really twisted. And I remember it just really being an intense moment of fear.
Well, and the New Testament calls Lot that father who went and offered his daughters. The New Testament calls Lot righteous.
Right.
So
Right.
of course, any devout believer man would look at that and go, well, I guess that's what I would have to do.
And they have done that.
But if you look at modern psychology, if you hear of a man who says, God told me I need to sacrifice my son, we would call the authorities.
Right.
Why are we not looking at scripture through those lenses and saying, wait a minute, I don't think this is quite right. The transformation from Saul to Paul, he had just been persecuting Christians even to death. He had just went blind. Those are two causes of hallucinations. So did he actually see Jesus on the road to Damascus, or is that just a story of somebody's hallucination? And why should we be taking that as gospel?
Mm-hmm.
Right. When I look at the Bible, I like to go into it, and what I do now, whether this is just my therapy or just I know the truth. I know men wrote the Bible, and I respect the text in the sense of, well, let's look at it. Who wrote this? When I say I respect, I don't respect a story where it says if somebody rapes your daughter, and she wasn't engaged, go ahead and just get that 30 shekels of silver. I don't respect that. But what I do is I sit down, and a lot of Christians get upset with me, and a lot of Bible believers, but I say this was okay. And they say, well, God wouldn't. Exactly. This disconnect. That's not your God. That is, somebody wrote that and thought it was okay.
Right.
So let me ask a question about children. Because when does a child, I'm getting a little not religious but spiritual, when do we as beings have that, I'm going to ask each one of you, that connection with our true consciousness and our God? And then it starts to be pushed out of the way by indoctrination. Do we have that? I want to hear from all of you. There's no right and wrong, of course.
Go ahead.
I just want to say, I don't know if children are designed to have like intricate systems of belief at young ages. I think children should be children, honestly, that they should be free to run and play and have, their imagination and imaginary friends. I think children should be children without, that filter and that indoctrination. And so I think, as they get older, as our brain develops, we can, critically think and weigh ideas against other ideas. But children are not developmentally able to weigh ideas and think things through the same way that we can as adults. So I think kids should be kids 100%.
Thank you.
Well, look at the prefrontal cortex and what insurance companies and rental car companies have already set in place. They did that based on scientific data. And that data proves that the prefrontal cortex isn't developed fully until they're 25 years old. So you have an element of restricting who can rent a car,
Right.
what the insurance rates are for cars. You can't force, no judge on the planet would allow a 14-year-old to adopt a child because they're not developed enough.
Mm-hmm.
But then you see other requirements being placed on children for other reasons and entering into covenants without consent via circumcision at birth or 8 days old based on their belief. And that is per the religious texts as a sign of the covenant. They don't have consent to say whether they want to enter into that covenant or not, but the parents are forcing that. And when you take all that into consideration, you got to really look at, wait a minute, they don't have the wherewithal to be understanding what they're part of. So
they require it, the parents require it, and they also reward it. So if you go and get saved and you have your baptism or you whatever your practice is, there's a reward and you're part of the group. And, you know, of course, that survival brain that we've got, it's like, okay, I'm in the pack now. I'm part of the pack. I'm truly deeply part of the pack. I don't understand what it means 100%, right? Because they're kids. But I remember when I got saved and did all of that, it was like, okay, I'm in the in crowd now, and I'm going to be okay. I'm not going to have to fear things like I thought I had to. You do anyways, because it's in there.
Yeah.
Fear is indoctrinated, but you get a moment of being like, yeah, it's okay. But when kids, I think when kids, you know, when they're born, when you read stories like past life memories coming out, or lots of other esoteric type things, how convenient, great name. But that's, you know, they're all happening when they're very, very young, prior to that whole, you know, their brain development, prior to when they're in that alpha and theta state. And when they don't have the critical faculty, when they don't have all of that stuff, they're in this sort of imaginary world where they're still sort of connected to whatever their source is, whatever they feel inside of them. And they usually have their own stories, and they usually have their own kind of ideas anyways, or they ask a lot of questions about it. But yeah, it fades over time because structures are given and you're told you're wrong and you have to do it this way.
Yeah, so. Thank you, Stevie. Speaking of structures, so let's address how parents say, well, we need these morals. We got to have the commandments. They're going to be running wild if we don't give them the structure. This is why we indoctrinate children. Just let's talk about that, how true that is and how untrue it is. Anyone?
Well, I think as humans, we learn better through stories. I think that's something that science has taught us, that, you know, we resonate more with, you know, different values and different ideas when it's told in a story form. You know, that's the whole idea of like the parables and some other things that come with like the biblical text. So I think there may be a way to tell stories and use some of those things that are still, you know, helpful to us as people without maybe presenting it as truth. You know, children are, you know, magical thinkers. They believe in like fairy tales and, you know, and imagination. And so, you know, just how it's presented, I think makes a difference in how it's accepted. You know, if it's presented as, all right, this is imagination, this is just something to teach a lesson, there's some emotion behind it, it could resonate with them in a way that maybe isn't as harmful as teaching it as this happened, this is real, this is for, you know, this is true, but this is like a story to illustrate. They can learn about analogies along with all the other things that they're, you know, thinking about at that age, but maybe not taking it seriously because it's play.
Absolutely.
Can we do that with apart from religion? Like, for instance, I mean, I know you all would agree, obviously, from what we're discussing, but how do you, let's say, okay, someone tells a child, God says you lie. And if you, God says he hates liars. But I mean, sometimes lying actually can save your life, or it helps. So apart from religion, can we build better or give better examples, like you said, through stories? Yeah. Aesop fables were some of my favorites growing up. So, you know, how do we, I guess what I'm trying to say is, how can we help parents, maybe future parents who are listening, say, you know, these commandments aren't fail-safe, because why should you get your head, and I'm not being facetious, why should you be a martyr, get your head chopped off in Islam, in a Muslim country, just because you won't say Jesus is a JASS? You know, why would you die for that? You know, sometimes it helps you to just lie and get out of this situation. How can we talk to parents about not relying on a religion, which sometimes those commandments don't work out? Am I making myself clear? Like, how can we show them, look, lying isn't always wrong. Sometimes you have to do certain things to survive. And how do we do that? How do we break them out of it? I think I'm trying to just appeal to the people who are listening, saying, well, what do I do if I don't have these 10 commandments?
Yeah. Well, I think stories are a great way. I mean, it just, yeah, because the imagination is so heightened in a child. You know, am now living in Australia with my husband, who's Australian, and he grew up in a double-decker bus in a Nana Marga belief system, which is more of a yogi sort of belief system, a lot more peaceful. But still, like, I watch now he's got 8 brothers and sisters. They all have kids. None of them practice Nana Marga at all anymore. And they teach all of their children through simple life stories, giving them experiences. And when they act up, they never spank, they never hit, they never do any of that. None of the family does that. And I've watched them so many times just get down on the child's level and explain why what they did is a problem and how the repercussions of that are going to hurt other people or get them into another not so great situation. And they need to think about, that kind of thing. It doesn't require structure and punishment and abuse. It's clarity. Kids just need explanation and calm clarity. And of course, a lot of things come into play. I think also, eating, if you're giving your kids sugar and caffeine all the time, there's going to be a lot more problems with your child and a lot more attitude issues. But when it comes to just explaining life, it just takes a little bit of patience. And that's it. I mean, that's what I'm experiencing here, watching them.
Right.
I just want to add that, we're going to find a lot of parents in religion make excuses for the types of abuse that continue generationally. We expect those who were spanked to say, well, I turned out fine, so, what's the problem? We know that that's an expectation within the mental health community to hear from parents who were spanked as children. So breaking those generational problems, I think, are really going to take a more in-depth and active participation from the mental health community to raise awareness and take those little caveats out of the DSM-5 and really take a second look at the diagnoses and what's really going on from a mind control basis and from an abusive level basis within the religious texts.
What about the parents who, I think that's excellent adage. What you just said is spot on. We need more mental health care professionals involved. And I had a wonderful interview with Dr. Powell. It was life-changing, to be honest. I've really I never looked at women in church the way I look at women in church now. I mean, I knew that women are more, 70% of cults are women, but just the way you showed me, hey, the churches, these women aren't even getting married. They're devoting themselves to the church. A lot of these women are mothers. So, it's a whole different, I'm going to ask you, Dr. Powell, what about that? The single mothers, and they're stuck in from your research and your teaching, what happens with them, with their children, when the church is like the husband and the dad?
Yeah, I mean, single mothers face, I think, so many unique challenges when it comes to not maybe having the support and resources that they would like to have. And the church can provide that in a really insidious way, as far as having, male mentors or, male faith leaders that say, this is what you need to do, or we'll take him for a few days, or this is how you should go, or providing assistance with, maybe something they need financially. And so that type of relationship also means that there's an aspect of power and control that comes along with that, because in order to get the resources and support, they have to basically subscribe to the teachings that the organization has. And that also means that they could be less likely to seek help from other ways, because they're getting it all within this community. They have this sense of belonging. They feel like it's not just me and my child, it's me and my child in this community of people that I can go to for help and support. And that is a really difficult thing to break, especially in situations where they may not have the best relationship with their own family, or they may come from a situation where they've experienced trauma or abuse themselves. So I think there's like Deborah Grace is saying, there's such a need for like increased awareness, but also like an active participation in helping people understand some of the insidiousness that goes along with, you know, subscribing to these set of beliefs and being in a very organized and structured oppressive organization.
We'll also look at the abuses that come directly out of churches from church leaders who we find out years later were part of abuse to the younger generation, the children who are so they're a lot of these children come from broken homes or from homes that don't have critical thinking, so they're much more able to be preyed upon by people who are in the church as leaders with nefarious purposes, looking to prey upon the children and the women, especially the single women, and use them for their gratification, for lack of a better word. And we're finding more and more and more and more cases of that. There was just a report that came out a couple months ago, just from one denomination, listing over 700 abuses.
Yeah.
Just one denomination, and that doesn't cover all the others. And a lot of the denominations are more adept at covering their abuses and hiding that from the public, but you just can't keep things like that in the dark forever. But the people that are in those churches have such a level of diminished critical thinking and lack of boundaries. The church is just ripe for a lack of boundaries environment. And then it's also conducive to narcissists and abusers. And we should really take a good look at that too.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Most of the leaders. I thought about. I'm doing a lot of sharing, but I hope that it's positive. Okay, so as coming out of the cult, I didn't, and even on camera right now, it's going to be on Esoteric's channel. I still would say I'm a Hebrew Israelite when I would speak the truth about the RAPE in the Bible. I don't want to say it for your channel, and the other things, the bloodlust, the all of the blood sacrifice. I would say things about it. I even did on his channel. I have Jesus as a serpent in the garden, like just shaking their minds up, and they are up in arms. I'm saying believers. But what I would still say is, ladies, I'm still a Hebrew Israelite, and I would do it because I wanted. You know how they always say, oh, well, that person's not with us anymore, so don't listen. So I deliberately, esoteric knows to this day, I'll say, oh yeah, I'm a Hebrew Israelite. And God that's not God in the Bible. That's some men. So I don't know. I think it's helping because I've had a lot of women reach out to me saying, thank you for saying this. I would say things like, no, you don't have to have get pregnant to get, this is part of their doctrine. Have a man get pregnant and then you're in, like Flynn, God, you're going to make it on that chariot because you've got his baby. I'd say no, because look here, let me show you. So I, in essence, turn the Bible against the cult. I try to help them see, look, you want to hold on to this Bible? Let me show you what's in here. And I don't know how it seemed to be working. I'm throwing this out here to you all as professionals, but I won't let them just say, oh, she's not a Hebrew. They want to, the men, they want to tell the women, I'm a Jezebel, I'm a whore, I'm a witch, God's going to kill me. I'm not a Hebrew anymore. And so I make sure I say, no, I'm a Hebrew. And for me, I am the trauma that they gave me, I'm not practicing it, but I'm not going to just let it be in vain. So I use it to say, oh, yeah, I'm a Hebrew woman. See right here, God said it's okay. These men said it's okay for women to get RAPE. So what do you think about that? How I mean, should I leave it alone? Just go ahead and let it go and just, Have you ever heard of that before? I'm really wanting to know.
Oh yeah. They've been doing this has been happening for ages. I mean, look what happens, in the Islam community right now, in other countries. Like I get messages often from guys and girls in Egypt. For some reason, they are reaching out and they're just like, hey, I want to leave this, but I can't because I'm a felon, right? Because the church and state are still mixed in there. But this has been going on the control of children and women's minds was part of the doctrine that they have all created, because all the doctrines created by men, right? And yeah, so it's just been going on and on and on. I mean, I've talked to a woman they were in a church, the pastor was RAPE-ing her 2 daughters, and the pastor's wife was helping him by holding the girls down. And it's just like how twisted the minds must be, this obedience that's required from women specifically. And in order our requirements to get in heaven, if you look at, I think it's the Mormon religion as well, where you've got to have a whole bunch of babies or something like that to get into certain levels. Yeah. I mean, our requirements are different from men. And yet at the same time, we have to obey like crazy. And it just gets passed down. It's just, again, going back to the kids, what are we actually teaching them? How are we teaching them to become people that can create a world that we actually love living in, when these requirements are asinine, they're ridiculous, they were made a long time ago, and they're still being required today. We've got a whole new world, and we need a whole new mindset helping our world get out of the situations that it's in. If you look at the guys in the politics right now, I know I'm going off into other things, but look, they were raised in all of that. They were raised in all these religions. They had all these kinds of families, and their backgrounds were all in these religions. And we don't have a great planet being run by great people at the moment. And this is their background, especially America. Not especially, it's everywhere, but the politicians.
The religious text encourages a person to not have their own agency and their own autonomy. And so because of that, you have, like you were just saying, you have a great deal more loss of the ability for women to stand up for themselves. And there's a lot of internalized misogyny, which is preventing them from fighting against their own prison.
Yes. Wow. Thank you, ladies. I would like to let you know we will be doing a part 2. I'm hoping that you 3 and hopefully Esoteric will let me be a part of it, but we can return and talk more about cult and women. Dr. Powell, can you just, I'm going to let everybody close out and let you start. Can you remind me of your book? Do you have a book that you wrote on that? And I need to get
So
that
I'm in
book.
the process of writing a book. I haven't written it quite.
For some reason I thought you had a book.
But I do have a mini course on religious trauma that I did create, just kind of around helping people kind of know the signs of religious trauma and being able to recognize and be a support for people that they may notice have experienced religious trauma. Because I think these groups can be so isolating that even people on the outside may not necessarily know how to reach these individuals or what to say or what to do. So knowing what some of those signs are and knowing how to like thoughtfully, but also like gently intervene or just say something that may spark an interest where they feel safe or confident enough to actually do some exploration on their own, I think can be such a valuable resource, especially in today's society where, we're in the technological age and everything's online, planting seeds and helping people, explore and feel confident in exploring and asking more questions. So I do have that.
Well, thank you. And I'm looking forward to your book. No wonder. See, I should have known that you don't have a book because I would have had it by now. After we had that interview. That was an excellent interview. I hope to sit with you again soon. And let me move on to Deborah Grace. Please, Deborah, close out and give us your final words.
I just want to say that I think it's vitally important for those to really think about what backstops and firewalls are written into the texts. My saving grace was my mother always told me that if my belief was different than what the text said, then I needed to adjust me and not try to twist the text to fit. Little did she know that it would backfire, if you will. But it allowed me to really look with an open mind once I started seeing the chinks in the armor of the religious texts, and to really expand what I thought I knew and embrace it rather than push it away. As scary as it was, it allowed me to identify who I was outside of religion, because I didn't have an identity outside of it. I had lost everything there was about me because of those die to self texts and scriptures. And when you lose your identity to religion, you have to own the fact that it is now a hive, a Borg of sorts, and the propagation of it and the promulgation of it is colonizing. And that is detrimental to our next generation, to society, to humanity, to the world. And I think it's vital that we really take a second look at it.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Last but not least, Stevie Noah, please give us your final thoughts.
Yeah, that was beautiful, Deborah. And my final thoughts are, you don't have to live with this, the effects of it. It is not forever. I hear that all the time as well. And yes, we're always working on ourselves. Yes, we're always going to be, developing ourselves in some way, shape, or form. I have a Trigger Hacks Masterclass that helps get rid of the fear of hell, to get that started, that process. When you learn about how your body stores trauma, and you learn how your imagination, also your brain, your deletion, distortion, generalization, all of that stuff stores trauma, there are simple techniques you can use to at least alleviate the emotional attachment to it, so that you can have the wisdom behind it, but you don't have that trigger constantly popping up. So, I just want people to know that it's not forever, and that you can create a life you love. And I'm living proof of it. And so are my clients. And so are people that I've met so many times along the way on my journey away from religious indoctrination. So this conversation is so important. And it's also important for people to know that they have the capacity to think for themselves, to release this trauma, and to move on and create amazing lives and amazing relationships and anything else they want to create, and just become such a gift to the world, helping us break the binds that have kept religions going for years and years and years. So thank you.
Beautifully put. Thank you so much, ladies. And thank you to Esoteric Thoughts for allowing us to come together and have this very important conversation. As I said, I look forward to part 2. So peace.
Thank you.